The question escaped him before he could weigh it, thin and uncertain as the wind slipping through the canyon. "What happens if I touch you?" The lowly cowboy felt the words hang there, brighter than the firelight, heavier than his borrowed hat. He had ridden in with nothing but dust on his cuffs and a name no one bothered to remember. She stood across from him like a living horizon, a giant Apache woman whose presence made the earth feel deliberate. When she smiled back, it was not amusement or challenge, it was recognition, as if she had been expecting the question all along. He had followed her tracks by accident, or maybe by a kind of fate that pretends to be chance. The prints were broad and deep, pressed into the soil like shallow basins that caught the moonlight. People in the valley told stories to make sense of such signs. Some called her a curse, others a protector. None of those words prepared him for her eyes, calm and attentive, as if she measured the world not by fear but by care. When he introduced himself, his voice snagged. She listened without interrupting, and the simple act of being heard felt like a gift he hadn't earned. "Touch is a promise," she said at last, her voice low and steady, shaped by patience. "It carries intention." She crouched so they were nearer to level, though even then she seemed to gather the sky around her. The fire cracked. A coyote called. The cowboy lifted his hand, palm open, hovering between them. His heart beat like a hammer against a stubborn nail. He thought of fences he'd mended for other men, of cattle driven and wages delayed, of how often he'd been told to keep his hands to himself. He wasn't afraid of her strength. He was afraid of the meaning. What would it say about him if he crossed that small distance? What would it ask of him afterward? He lowered his hand without touching. She rose again, unoffended, the smile still there, patient as weather. The night settled into place. The question remained, no longer sharp but warm, like embers banked for morning. He understood then that nothing had ended. Something had begun, waiting for daylight to decide what it would become. Morning unfolded slowly. The canyon rinsed in pale gold, as if the sun were careful not to wake the stones too abruptly. The cowboy walked beside the giant Apache woman, their shadows stretching and shrinking with the bend of the river. He felt awkward at first, unsure where to place his stride, but she matched his pace without comment, adjusting as naturally as water flows around rock. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of small sounds, the scrape of boots, the whisper of grass, the steady breath of a land that had seen far more than either of them. He spoke when the quiet grew heavy in his chest. He told her about the jobs that never lasted, the ranchers who promised pay and delivered excuses, the way his life felt like a series of borrowed things. She listened, eyes forward, as though the river itself were hearing him too. When she answered, she did not offer pity. She spoke of her people, of ancestors who learned the weight of footsteps and the patience of waiting seasons. She said the land remembered everything, especially those who treated it gently. By noon, the heat pressed down hard. The cowboy's canteen ran light, and his legs trembled as the ground grew uneven. Without fuss, she slowed and stepped closer, her shadow falling over him like a moving shelter. The relief startled him more than the heat had. He reached out then, not to her skin, but to the edge of her woven sash. His fingers brushed the fabric, testing, respectful. Nothing broke. The sky stayed whole. The earth did not recoil. Instead, a quiet steadiness settled into his bones. She closed her eyes briefly, acknowledging the care in the gesture. "See," she said, "the world answers how you approach it." They shared water, passing the canteen back and forth. He asked about her height, expecting a joke, and was surprised when she answered with history. She spoke of being made large to stand between harm and home, of strength shaped by responsibility rather than pride. As they rested, he found himself studying the calluses on his hands, understanding them differently. Touch, he realized, was not about claiming or proving. It was about listening with the body. As the afternoon stretched on, his earlier question shifted. It was no longer what would happen if he touched her. It was what might happen if he learned to carry that same care into every step he took from that day forward. The valley seemed to sense their return before it saw them. Word traveled faster than footsteps, carried by glances and murmurs. by the uneasy feeling that something old had stirred and was walking openly again. People gathered near the cottonwoods where the land widened, some with crossed arms, some with hands empty and hopeful. The cowboy felt every eye on him, the familiar weight of being small pressing against his ribs. Beside him, the giant Apache woman stood calm, her presence steadying the ground itself. A rancher's voice cut the air, sharp with suspicion. Questions followed, then accusations dressed up as concern. The cowboy felt the old reflex rise, the urge to step back, to disappear. Instead, he remembered the careful brush of fabric, the way the world had answered gentleness with balance. He stepped forward, boots firm in the dust. His voice did not boom, but it carried. "She's a guardian," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his tone. "Not just of her people. Of this land." He spoke of the river's patience, of shadows offered in heat, of strength that did not need to threaten to be real. As he spoke, his hand reached for hers, fully this time, palm to palm. The contact was warm and grounding, like touching a truth he'd always known, but never named. A hush fell. The giant Apache woman smiled, wider than before, and inclined her head. "Touch is a promise," she said softly, "and promises shape the future." She looked not just at the crowd, but at the land around them, as if inviting it to witness. Something shifted. A woman stepped forward with a child, then another person with a jug of water. Fear loosened its grip, replaced by curiosity, then respect. The cowboy felt himself change in that moment, not taller, not stronger, but steadier. He understood that humility could carry courage, and that courage did not always look like defiance. Sometimes it looked like standing still and telling the truth. As dusk settled, fires were lit, not as warnings but as gatherings. Stories were shared. The cowboy listened more than he spoke, learning that belonging was not granted by size or status, but by care freely given. When night finally wrapped the valley, he and the giant Apache woman stood side by side, their joined hands casting a single shadow on the ground. It was proof enough that gentleness, once chosen, could change the shape of a place and the people within it, without breaking anything at all.